Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with homemade ricotta cheese. That's right, if I came over to your place and you served me homemade ricotta cheese, I would think you were pretty cool. And while that's a pretty good reason to do this, there are even better reasons, like it is super fun to do, ridiculously easy, and maybe most importantly, you will end up with something so far superior to what you buy in the store, you will actually be mad you haven't been making homemade ricotta sooner. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our draining station, which is simply a mesh strainer set over a pot that we will line with a few pieces of cheesecloth. And by the way, if you have a really fine mesh strainer, you don't really need the cheesecloth. But if you don't use it, you are not going to get that super sexy cheesecloth imprint on the surface of your cheese, which for me is one of my favorite things about this. But anyway, we're going to need something similar to this setup before we start making our cheese, which could not be easier, and believe it or not, only requires 4 ingredients. The first of which would be 4 cups of the best whole milk we can find. And we will transfer that into a nice heavy bottom saucepan. And then to make our homemade ricotta a little richer, I also like to add a little bit of heavy cream. Okay, not too much. I like to do about 2 tablespoons per cup of milk. And then to our milk and cream, we'll also add some salt. And that's going to be it for now. Okay, we're not going to add our 4th ingredient, which is white vinegar, until our milk's been heated. So for now, we'll just set that aside while we head to the stove, where we're going to place this over medium-high heat. And as this mixture starts to get hot, we will want to give it the occasional stir. And for that, I want you to use a figure-8 motion. And besides the obvious agitation, we are also practicing this movement for a little bit later when we stir in our vinegar. And what we're trying to do here is heat this to exactly 195 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, please do not accidentally heat it to 195 Celsius. And ideally, you're going to check this with some sort of probe thermometer. But if you don't have one, you can just do this by eye, since 195 is going to be right before it starts to simmer. And at that point, you'll start seeing steam come off the surface, and some tiny little bubbles forming around the outside, around the outside, around the outside, as well as a little bit of a skin appearing on the surface. So those would be your visual clues this is just about to simmer. But having said that, get a probe thermometer. Every kitchen should have one. And then listen to me now, but hear me later. As soon as our mixture gets to 195, we're going to immediately turn off the heat. And we're going to quickly pour in our vinegar. And then start stirring in a figure-8, while counting 1 ravioli, 2 ravioli, 3 ravioli, 4 ravioli. And that's it. After 4 raviolis, we're going to stop. And we're going to let this sit untouched for exactly 6 minutes. All right, do not touch it or stir it. In fact, I'm not even sure I want you to stare at it. And that's it. As soon as our timer rings, we will quickly but very carefully ladle that into our strainer. And then once we get towards the end, we can just go ahead and pour the rest in. And that's it. We're simply going to let our ricotta drain for anywhere between 20 and 45 minutes. And that liquid draining through is called the whey. Yes, whey. And the stuff left in the strainer is called the curds, which once drained and cooled, we're going to call ricotta, or ricotta, or regatta, or regat, depending on where you're from. And as far as the draining time, the longer you let it go, the drier and firmer your ricotta will be. So if you want your ricotta a little softer and creamier, just let it drain for about 20 minutes. Whereas if you want something a little drier and a little firmer, you could do it for like 45 minutes. Right, personally, I think the sweet spot for me is about 30 to 35 minutes, which is where I was at right here, when I gathered up the ends of my cheesecloth and lifted that out of the strainer and placed it lovingly in a bowl. And that's it. We'll just sort of gather our cheesecloth up to sort of cover the top. And then all we need to do is let this cool down to room temp on the counter before covering it in plastic and transferring it into the fridge until it's thoroughly chilled before we serve it. And while you're waiting, you can Google things to do with whey. And if you see anything exciting, let me know. And that's it. Once our ricotta is fully chilled, we'll remove that from the bowl and then very carefully unwrap it from the cheesecloth and attempt to invert it on a plate without wrecking the surface so that we can see that incredibly sexy cheesecloth imprint. I mean, come on, look at that. So yes, homemade ricotta is absolutely gorgeous. But if you're impressed by the appearance, just wait until you take a taste. All right, compared to that stuff you get at the store, this is so much better in both taste and texture. And I'm not just talking about the cheap ricotta at the store. Okay, even if you buy one of the fancy expensive ones, this is still going to blow that away. And as good as this is off your fingers, it is even better on a piece of toasted bread. And by the way, we don't want to put much salt in this when we make it, because that draws liquid out of the cheese. So it is going to need a little bit of additional salt when you serve it. So if it tastes a little bit bland, don't worry. That's all it needs. And besides that, a little bit of olive oil is never a bad idea. And by the way, most people use lemon juice for this, which I think is a mistake, since we can always add lemon to something, but we can never unlemon it, which is why I think the neutral flavor of the white vinegar is the best choice. And then what we'll do here is finish up with a couple of my favorite serving suggestions. The first of which would be to drizzle this with a nice honey, followed by some nice fruity extra virgin olive oil. And then we'll finish off with a little shake of cayenne for some sweet heat, as well as a light but very important sprinkling of sea salt. And that, my friends, is just an absolutely scrumptious bite, even if you use mediocre ricotta from the store. But with this fresh, amazing homemade stuff, it is one of the most delicious things you'll ever eat. And I really can't think of a better way to show off a batch of homemade ricotta cheese. Except for maybe the next pairing I'm going to show you, which would be the timeless classic of fresh ricotta, some super sweet tomatoes, some freshly sliced basil, some freshly ground black pepper, finished with a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil, and as previously recommended, a little sprinkle of salt. And of course, if you also want to drizzle over some balsamic vinegar, go ahead. I mean, you are, after all, the Abe Vigoda of your homemade ricotta. And speaking of fish, the Italians say never pair cheese with fish, but the last time I checked, anchovy was a fish, and some beautifully briny and salty anchovies would be absolutely perfect on this cheese. And if at any point in this video you said to yourself, there has to be a catch, it cannot be this simple, well, I'm here to tell you it is. In fact, I probably made it look harder than I needed to, as it really truly is super easy. So whether you serve this simply on some toasted bread, topped with luscious tidbits and assorted fabulous doodads, or use it in your next lasagna or ravioli filling, no matter how you enjoy this, I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.